This is Joshua Karyevsky. You are listening to the Agile Uprising podcast.
All right, everybody, greetings and welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I'm your back again host, Jay Hrcsko, and we have a full boat this evening. Joining me, I have a first-time guest, Amy Neal. Hello, Amy.
Hello, hello.
Thank you for joining us. We have a returning guest, Chris Wistrom.
Hello.
We have another returning guest, Mike Caddell.
Howdy, y'all.
We have a longtime listener, first-time caller, Todd Thrash.
Yay.
And my partners in crime, Chris Murman.
Yes.
And Andrew Leff.
Hey.
Everybody sounds really excited this late Wednesday night. In the middle of September, we're into day 174 of flattening the curve. It was supposed to only be 15 days. When we started this, Murman had hair. I had no beard. It was quite exciting. So the topic of tonight's episode, we're going to discuss the corporate Nuremberg defense. So for those of you that aren't familiar, the Nuremberg defense is also considered called superior orders, or it's I was just following orders. It gets its name from the Nuremberg trials at the end of World War II, where there was what was called the Nuremberg defense was given by a bunch of the Nazi generals who were saying they were just following orders when they were doing some of the horrible things that they were doing. And we're going to discuss this in terms of corporate life when someone says, I forget the exact quote, but it was something along the lines of, hey, look, my boss has his marching orders and I'm just doing what they asked me to do. So, yeah, that's
Jay,
why
don't we read the post
for a project plan.
Let's read the original post that came on Discord, right? That started this whole thing. So in the notes here, you didn't say who wrote it. So if someone remembers, they can point it out. But it says, is there a perception, in parentheses, mostly for people who have not been or been not led or been part of a large transformation, that
you're looking at the wrong agenda, Murman.
I am.
That's the next show where John is hosting.
Oh well,
It sounded like John.
Shout out to John Snyder, who right now is in a hot tub in Disney drinking a Long Island iced tea. Yeah, you're getting a step ahead of the game.
Someone else read it.
So I'm not going to take the time to find it, but it was definitely along the lines of how do you deal with this was the question. How do we deal with someone who's saying, look, my boss told me to get a project plan, so I'm here looking for a project plan. But before we get into how to coach around it or how to get away from it, I'm going to start with, I'm going to go around the horn and ask, have you actually encountered this before? And what is the most recent context you've encountered this? And I'm going to start with you, Mike Caddell. So when's the last time you heard this out of somebody? And what I'm just doing what I was told to do. And what was the context?
Last time I heard that out of somebody was probably January or so at the client prior to the client I'm currently working with. And the context was the person in the position of authority thought SAFE stunk and didn't want to do PI planning. So he gave the directive that his people would no longer participate in PI planning, which left the release train with, some business people, some system team type people, but nobody to actually do the development work. So it was a real interesting moment.
Well, I can't wait to come back to that one. I'm going to skip over to you, Andrew Leff. When's the last time you heard somebody say, I was just doing what he told me to do?
20 minutes ago.
I was going to say this week, you beat me.
Oh, I hear it all the time. And there's a lot of empathy for me when I hear that, or I feel very empathetic when I hear that from somebody, because I feel that it's a trap. So you're kind of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So we will progress through this. I won't belabor on my answer, but I hear that all the time. It's daily. It doesn't, I can't escape it.
How about you, Amy? When's the last time you heard someone say, I'm just doing my boss told me to do?
It's been a while for me, and I think maybe it's just the people I'm working with right now are awesome, but It's been a while. I mean, I have some very good examples, but they are old. Hey, we were doing these metrics because my boss asked me to do these metrics kinds of things. Nothing recent though. Thank God. Yeah.
You're one of the lucky ones.
Right.
Todd, swinging it over to you.
So I actually run into this quite a bit. It usually runs around policy. And if anybody's caught my recent comments and discussions around psychological safety, that's usually what's spawning this. Because I have government employees with 25 plus years of tenure that are afraid if they don't follow something to the T, they're going to get fired. And it's resulted in a big conversation with my director about psychological safety.
How about you, Chris? Chris Wistrom, I should say, not Murman.
Thank you for specifying. It's always hard when there's two of us around. So I think the last time I heard it was probably in, I want to say June or July. And our company was going through some organizational changes. And we had some communication mechanisms set up within our organization, and they were changing. And I was asking questions like, well, what about these different techniques? And at that point, it was just, we're going to have to do it this way for a while.
Okay. And Mr. Murman.
Yeah, it's not a matter of how recent I heard it. I just chimed in on Leff. Like it's just a habitual thing. The most interesting part of that is it's how they say I'm just doing what I'm told. The most often response I get from either people that I'm trying to help guide, through something, training, launch, whatever, but also some of my own teammates, right? What I hear is, well, I raised my hand in objection once, very politely, so that I could get my objection on the record, as if there is such a fucking thing as a record of the transformation that we can go back and read in the annals of history. Like, oh, you were the person that said, no, we shouldn't do this. Like, history will be on your side, friend. Like that.
I've stumbled into something. Maybe this is a practice we need to talk more about, right? Like, how like there's ADRs that you put in Git. Like maybe we should do the tale of the transformation, right? Like we hire a cultural anthropologist to come in and actually document what happened when.
Plato talking about how Atlantis got, the transformation of the great telco of 2020 was submarined by a volcanic eruption and nonsense. But they make it. I'm sure you all have heard it before. Like you get your objection on the record, knowing that they're absolutely not going to take it, but you get it on the record, knowing full well that you're just going to end up doing something different anyways. And it makes me wonder, like, is it more passive aggressive to just sit there and do nothing and kind of fume about it? Or to be like, nope, I'm going to be on the right side of history and say, I got this on, right? But in the end, I'm just going to do what my boss wants, which is different. It's really kind of crappy if you think about it.
There's no good way to put it. I do like your remark about letting the objection be known. A friend of mine who's an agile coach, good friend Steve Harper, always references the U.S. Army has the thing called Toot Salute. So you complain once, you complain twice, and the third time you salute and just follow the order. So I think at that point, that's your point, Murman, about raising the official objection. I want to swing over to Leff, because Leff actually gave me a nice transition here where you said, Drew, you said, when I hear someone say that, I can't help but feel empathy. Can we talk about that for a minute? Like why is that the first thing you feel?
Because having been in a position where, me and the capons, right? Like you're in a position of title, but not of influence. So you're basically, to me, I look at it as, have you been beaten so much that you just give up, right? And now you're just carrying orders forward. So you're just regurgitating what you were told, and it creates a pattern. And it's something that Todd said, right? It's cultural. It's ingrained in the culture sometimes that it's so deep rooted that to say that you're empowered to challenge, it's not accurate, right? That's super hard to do. You're asking someone to cross an edge that is way too challenging and way too risky. So by sometimes focusing in on, well, why do you feel that you're just carrying orders, right? Or why do you feel that you just have to carry out what you were told? Is privilege and rank really an issue? Or is it, have you really tried and you just haven't been able to break that barrier? So that's why, just through years of just feeling that way and working with people that feel that way, that's why I kind of lean towards that direction. Believe me, I have plenty that say that as a barrier to just to shut me up, right? I'm just carrying out orders. I'm not responsible for anything. I'm just regurgitating what I was told. There's also that, but there's always more behind it. So if you're willing to take the time to unravel it, you can actually get some deep insight as to maybe how to challenge that thinking to help them be better at just not carrying out orders.
Well, that begs the question of like, what does it mean to try, or like, what is an honest effort versus I've done this 15 times and this is the 16th and I don't feel like getting kicked in the face again, right? I mean, there's obviously that, to your point of there's more to the story. There's a ton of context with every single Nuremberg defense, but quantifying like what is an honest try, or do I even have the skills to combat like what they're saying? Like, do I even know a better answer? Am I just telling them what they should be doing versus, walking them through it, actually coaching them through it, kind of a thing? It's not all apples to apples.
Yeah, and I just want to put a disclaimer out there real quick. This does not correlate to how I would feel about the trials back in World War II, right? So I don't want anyone, I'm not being empathetic towards that type, this is strictly from a work organizational standpoint. This is the world we live in. I feel like I need to put a disclaimer out there.
Yeah, you're probably right. I probably do need to put something in the show notes, that warning, the opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily represent the opinions expressed in the Agile Uprising as a whole or other Agile Youth certifying bodies. Yeah, you're right. I mean, we're not making excuses here for some of the truly deplorable acts that the Nazis made, but that's the genesis of this term. It was, the excuse given was, I was only following orders. I do want to touch on Amy. You said you haven't seen this in quite a while, making you the luckiest of all of us. But the last time you did, does what Andrew was saying kind of resonate? Like the whole, in that moment were you thinking, man, I feel bad for this person because they're just doing all they know how to do? Or can you talk us through a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, everything resonates. Absolutely. We'll start with that. I've been there, right? I've been there where I'm like, I'm trying to keep my head down because there are weird things going on. So I'm just going to do what I'm told, and we're going to get, I'm using the example of metrics because that's everybody's favorite thing. Metrics, please get this done this way. Okay, I'm just going to do it until I don't have to do it anymore, basically. So a lot of that comes with your leadership. And someone mentioned earlier culture. Like, what culture are you in? What kind of culture where you have to ask, is this the right thing to do? Or are they telling me to do this just because it's a command and control and they need to know that they're the ones calling the shots? Like, what is it? How do you address it? So right now, I feel like I'm in a good place. I work with a really good team. I know there are other things going on in the business where people are going, I'm just doing what I'm told right now. I know that's happening. But in my own little myopic world where I'm at, it's not happening with the team I'm working with. And yes, I'm very thankful for that. I spent a lot of years doing that, listening to it, witnessing it. So I'm just going to bask in that for a little while.
You're right, though, because sometimes in an organization, there are things greater than you at play, greater than the transformation, greater than whatever you're working on at play. And that may influence someone's behavior who may not necessarily be the whole, I was just following orders type. They may end up being that way because they have greater concerns. So, Mike, I want to ask you, right? You led in with a very specific example where someone just said, that's it, we're not doing PI planning, right? Which I could do a whole episode on how Andrew would coach you around that, because I remember pictures of him loading up a program board of like 3,000 people's worth of PI planning into the back of a Suburban. So I would love to hear that. But Mike, so when that person says, that's it, we're not doing PI planning, like, was there any bit of empathy there? Like, what did your brain start kicking in and saying, how do I handle this?
Couple of things came to my head in rapid succession. The first was I admitted an emotional reaction, a feeling of kind of rejection, to be honest, because it came across like this person was rejecting the attempts to help the organization become more effective. And I started asking some questions and trying to figure out why. And what it turned out is this person had mentally gotten beyond where the rest of the organization was. And he saw where there were some structural problems that were essentially wasting, quote, air quote, his people's time. And he decided to kind of thumb his nose at the rest of the organization and say, I'm not going to waste my people's time. So with some dialogue and some carefully planted seeds by myself and several other people, we got some compromise and made the best out of what we could, so that it wasn't just the business folks trying to plan without the technology folks participating in the dialogue.
The more you talk about this, the more I think we could turn that into an entire episode of itself, like safe hijinks gone awry, hey, let's launch an art right into the dumpster, the dumpster fire that's behind Leff, right? Like that's a whole different conversation. So let me ask you, Chris Wistrom, the last time somebody said to you, I'm only following orders, I'm only doing what I was told, I have a manager to make happy, blah, 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 blah. Did empathy play into your thought process at all? Like at some point, did you say, these people, I feel terrible?
Well, of course, everything is context dependent. So there are different levels, I think, too, that we can address. So if somebody's saying, I'm just going to log my time because I have to log my time, the company wants me to log my time, is that really a battle that we want to fight? So fine, log your time. And like Amy said, there are sometimes bigger organizational issues at play, and we have to find little areas where we can make just maybe a 1% improvement. We can't ask everybody to just switch everything that they know about ways of working in one day, right? So, okay, do what you're comfortable with over here, but maybe we can focus on one small improvement over here, and then it can grow.
Okay. On the back of that, Todd, so you also had a specific example where you're in a larger company where people have been there for a long time, right? So that we talked about culture, and that's behavior is almost ingrained to the point of being a lizard brain activity. And as someone who's not as the 40 or 50 year veteran, like how does the empathy part play into your interactions?
Well, I mean, I certainly understand it. And it's interesting is like some of the things are like super trivial, and it's like, it's things that are impediments, but it's like, if you went and did this one little thing, no one's going to notice. And I literally had somebody tell me, I don't want to get fired. And they were a 27.5-year veteran. And I was like, it was for something like changing, a state on a work item. And I'm like, that's not even going to register on anybody's radar. But it turns into, like I said earlier, a lot of these psychological safety conversations with my director. And when I came into the organization a couple of years ago, I was really frustrated. I butted a lot of heads. Now I'm actually getting to drive a lot of this change as part of our transformation and evolution that we're in. And it's the same people involved, and they're like, but this is how we do it. And it was like, well, let's explore other ways to do it. And so it's starting to shift. And it's, somebody made the comment, I think it was Murman earlier this week, said, made a comment about moving, people don't like it when you move their cheese. And there's a lot of cheese moving right now. So, and it's not as big as some people make it out to be. Like in the grand scheme of things, my director was like, we really made one little change, but everybody's acting like we just moved an entire mountain. And so that's interesting to see small changes have big ripples right now.
I think, Todd, how that translates to me though is that it, like the size of the change right, is always relative depending on the perspective. And I think that what you and your director were identifying is like, WTF, this isn't that big of a deal, when clearly it is to someone else. Now, whether they're correct in their thinking, I think is less important than how do we understand the delta between the two, and how do we kind of get apples to apples on this? Because until we do that, arguing about the size is kind of, not that you all were having a fruitless argument, just that can sometimes, muddy the waters when it shouldn't be.
No, and that's absolutely correct. I mean, because what we're seeing is that, particularly kind of, perceptions and expectations for how a role was originally being carried out, we make a relatively minor change with the intention of positive impact on other pieces in play. And it is a kind of a fundamental change for some of these people. And I think what we're starting to realize is that they think that it's reflecting on them doing poorly in their role. And in some cases that may actually be the case, and some not. And so that's, I mean, you're right. It is a small change, but it's perceived very big. And that's something that we have to be more cognizant of going forward as we get ready to make the next change.
You just made me think, Todd, when you said, people are worried about, covering for themselves and covering up for that. Michael Hammond in the book Evolve Agility. Mike Caddell, did you finish that yet, by the way?
Yeah, got back on it tonight.
Jesus. Michael Hammond, if you're listening,
reading
please,
to do
please,
for my client.
Please come on the show. Mike Caddell, I can't rely on him to do the book report. But he actually talks about it. He talks about in his book that everybody has two jobs. We have the job that we're hired to do, and then we have the job of hiding and covering for our own mistakes, real or perceived. And I thought that was kind of a cynical way to look at it, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized there are some people who get too caught in that second loop, and they forget about what they're there to do. They're so worried that they're covering for a, imposter syndrome or whatever, that they kind of get wrapped around the axle. And you actually made me think, Mike, when I asked you, quite honestly, what did you think of this jabroni saying, "Oh, we're not doing PI planning"? And your first response is, "Well, I was kind of pissed at first." And that's an honest, visceral response. I read an article talking about unconscious bias, where the money quote that I took away was, "Nobody is responsible for their first thought. You're responsible for your second thought and your first action." And I'm glad that you didn't go with the first thought, because everybody who's listened to the show long enough knows I'm basically all id. There's no ego or super ego. It just comes out. And typically I would say, if somebody said to me, well, Chris Wistrom comes to me as a director and says, "You know what, we're not going to do PI planning," I would just probably say something like, "Maybe on your planet that makes sense, but here it's not a fucking chance." So yeah, don't go with your first thought. Go with your second thought and your first action. And I want to go back to Leff. So now let's get into the nuts and bolts of it, right? So someone comes to you, they make an ask, right? Say they're going through a transformation, and they're saying, "Drew, I really need what amounts to a project plan. I need what you're going to do for the next 4 PIs, and I need all your demos planned out." How do you coach yourself out of that hole?
Oh, there's going to be things that just take time to coach out of, right? So maybe the first action is starting to produce that, right? Starting to put together those artifacts, starting to accommodate the ask, but then weave in what can I do to help you get what you need done? What part of these tasks help you get what you need? So I might flip it, right? And I really may focus on really what they need and how I can help them. And if it's like, just go do all this crap because I was told I need to get it done, there's not a lot of quality in doing that. But that's and something that Todd was talking about, and everyone else brought a little piece of it, is if you can start to visually represent what edges you're asking people to cross, literally create these little icons to show that you were asked to cross 27 edges today and you didn't cross one because they were too uncomfortable. You can start to break down that neuroscience of how people behave to get them to switch it in a way that makes sense for them, but also drives towards more of what they desire to work, like what environment they want to help create. So what are you willing to change to warrant a change in someone else? Everyone always wants people to change. Everyone always wants the system to change around them, but that typically doesn't happen. So what can you do to change? So that's where I like to start. I'm being long-winded and my allergies are killing me. Sorry, if you were watching me on camera, I'm like wiping my nose. Literally, how can you inject that into somebody to inspire them to be more self-serving and not just a servant or a delivery, of a message? So I try not to react. It's very hard. It's very hard for me not to, but when I get those asks, I'm like, seriously, there's no value in doing this. So I think from that standpoint, it's trying to shift the paradigm onto someone else and get them to figure out what they need from people by driving that behavior. So.
Okay. So Chris Wistrom, not same question, but when you encountered the whole, hey, I'm just following orders, how did you talk yourself out of that ditch without having to give the same stupid status report, project plan?
Well, I mean, is it me that's trying to talk myself out of it, or am I trying to help somebody overcome that in themselves? Because I think those are two different questions.
Good point.
So if it's me, I want to understand what the need is and why someone might be asking for something. Again, it's context specific. So if it's something really small, then maybe it's not worth addressing. But if it is something bigger, something that could affect the team or something that's going to affect how we're able to deliver software or maybe have a sustainable pace of development, something like that, I want to dig in. I want to find out where the request is coming from, why somebody might be asking for something. A lot of times it's around anxiety. It's scary to change. It's hard for people to change. So really just understanding where they're coming from and finding ways to address their core need rather than just what they're asking for on the surface.
What problem are we trying to solve? That's the question you always have to ask. What problem are we trying to solve? And then hopefully get to the crux of it, and then maybe try to coach around that. And I think this all resonates with something that Chris said earlier, which was, if we can pick some little area and start with a win, then we can grow on that. And then we can have other areas of influence. And maybe, it's a slow thing. It doesn't happen instantly. We have to be patient. But if we can start with one thing, we need to start with that one thing. Ask the right questions to try to get to the crux of it.
Kind of along those lines, sorry, I really believe that people, generally speaking, act rationally given their situation. So kind of to your point, Amy, if we can understand their situation, then look for little wins. It's, but most people are going to respond rationally to what they're presented with.
Most people. That's a qualifying statement you have to make there, because some people don't act rationally. So, Murman, you're going to get the tough question. So say you're in the scenario where someone says, Chris, I just need this. Just give me the damn thing. And you're asking, so what problem is this trying to solve? How are you trying to get what is me giving you this, widget going to solve? And they are just completely not buying what you're selling. I don't care, Chris. I don't want to talk about this. I just want my meat widget. How do you get yourself around that one? That's a pretty substantial roadblock. And let's assume that this person is not some senior vice president director that could fire you in a second, right? Because that truly changes the paradigm. If it's someone who's still just asking for something, and the more you try to understand, the more dug in they get, how do you get out of that hole?
I was just about to ask, have you been on some of my work calls recently? Yeah, no, I get asked to do that every damn day. I will say that my answer in the last probably year and a half has changed. I feel like the more that these work situations that we're talking about kind of kick you in the teeth, you kind of get a little more humble and not so brash in your response. I've heard a lot of the responses tonight, very, very understanding, empathetic, right? And I think that in the end, the more mature we are as human beings, the better we can handle those stupid requests that we get, which are daily, right? So specifically, it depends on my relationship with the person. If I have the rapport with them, the cachet with them, not necessarily the control, power over them, but just more like, how is me challenging them going to be received? If I don't know them, the simple answer is, what's it going to be used for, right? It's just kind of find out, like, is this something that you're going to present, or that I'm going to be asked to present as a thing? Or is it, we asked them to take this step and they can only go here, so we're trying to meet them in the middle, and so I need to kind of get a little creative about how I do it. If I do know them, though, I do ask those questions of like, what? Okay, we both know that this will get nothing, right? I as a consultant, hey, it's, I'm on their dime, I'm paying for your time. At the ultimate end of the day, I kind of can't really, at some point in time, they're gonna pull that out of their back pocket. You work for so-and-so, I'm paying your bill, like, I'm paying for your time, like, what do you care how your time's spent? So I just try to keep talking to them through this. And if they go, look, if it's something internal, or if my amount of headache in doing the ask versus the headache that I'm gonna have to go through to like spend the time to really like mess with them and really like argue with them, yeah, a lot of times I just compromise and go, yeah, here's 5 stupid slides on something that you're not even going to use and it's pointless, so why even do this, right? If I can knock that out in 15 minutes, but either I build rapport with someone that I can then use for a chit later, or something else, right? I've gotten a lot of use out of oh, what's a big deal, it's a half an hour of my time, get really efficient at knocking that that nonsense out. Does it help in the end? I don't know, right? Like that's the question of the day, but I don't have to worry about that now. If I just ask enough questions, I know how much effort to put in or how much time it's going to take, and then just kind of deal with it from there.
So let me ask you. Oh, go on, Chris.
I think sometimes if you do go through with the request, you eventually are able to build that rapport and build that trust, where maybe you're doing this a few times for them, even if maybe it's not the best thing. You do it a few times, you build that trust, and you can build up to having the conversation. It's not just always one and done. It's not always so black and white. There is maybe an opportunity in the future to still have that conversation and keep those lines open.
Yeah, well, and to your point, Chris, right? Like, if this is the 5th time that I've had the nonsense, request that none of the previous ones were used, right? Well, then that, I can feel a little more confident in saying, I don't think that's the best use of my time. And then you can kind of maybe back channel it to be like, look, so-and-so keeps asking me to do things that they don't actually do anything with. I'd love to spend my time on something that someone would use, right? Or is willing to bring me, instead of me just cranking out a document that you're going to use, or some nonsense, meeting him halfway kind of thing. Can we just have a conversation? Can you invite me to the next conversation? So rather than me spending time doing this, how about I just help you walk them through this, and then we'll figure out what the real problem is. Because in the end, the problem is not whether the ask is dumb. We know that the ask is dumb, but we need to help understand, like, what's the extra behind the dumbness, if that's a thing, I guess. But if you can kind of get in that conversation, it's just a lot of times people, that goes back to what Todd was saying about moving cheese. You can end up start moving people's cheese at that point in time by wanting to be invited to the conversation. So you just got to play that carefully.
So I want to go to Todd, but I don't want to talk about his cheese. I want to talk about, he used the term twice, emotional safety, 2 or 3 times. And a couple of you have touched on that briefly with remarks about trust. So Todd, have you ever had a situation where someone's coming to you, my boss is telling me to do this, and you're bending like the wind because you're trying to acquiesce and meet them where they're at. Have you ever had a situation where no matter how much bending you do, they just never got where you needed to get them? or they always wanted that thing, and all of your best attempts to have a meaningful conversation to get them safe and get them that emotional comfort to let go a little bit? Have you ever had that fall flat and just not land where you wanted to?
Maybe not in that scenario. One of the things I was thinking about, just with regards to the psychological safety, though, is that I was, we have a process where only certain people can request, say, builds, QA builds in particular. And I went to somebody and I said, hey, I need a QA build. And he's like, sorry, I need a lead to ask that, to request one of those. So I literally made a quarter turn to the right. And I said, hey, can you ask for a build? And the lead standing next to me is like, I need a build. But he told me no. I swear to you that's true. But I was told no with the lead standing right next to me, listening to me ask for it. And that's the level of what I'm talking about for psychological safety and where a request comes from. I was floored, but I was just kind of like, hang on, can you, so like I said, there's not a lot of bending, and I think some of it depends on manager. But I had as some of y'all know, I'm now working with a new team, or a super team, since it's 17 plus people. Well, it's actually 28 people on my daily scrums, but anyway. But I had somebody that came to me today, and I said, was trying to figure out how to work through a process, and I was explaining it, and I said, look, here, let me just make the changes for your, that way it'll be my name on it if anybody complains. And I said, but by the way, if anybody ever complains and chastises you about, any process change, come to me so that I can start to unravel, what process is causing that. And I think that I'm doing that to try to build that rapport with my new team. And he really appreciated me saying that. And he's like, okay, he's like, oh, because I hate to keep calling you and bugging you. I'm like, no, that's my job. Keep calling and bugging me. So like I said, I don't really have I don't have a case where somebody was coming to me and it was getting to bend. It's some of it was either me trying to figure out why they would have to bend based on a request, and how to undo some of that.
So let me ask you, Mike, I'm quasi familiar with some of the places you've worked. You've worked at enormous companies, giant enterprises. You've worked at smaller mom and pop shops. You've done banking, you've done insurance, finance, all that sort of stuff. Do you think that the prevalence of this statement, hey, my boss just asked me to do this, or my boss asked me and I'm asking you, does the size of the organization and the embedded, it's not, I don't want to use culture, but like the embedded, I guess, social mores, behaviors, do you think that plays into how often or how frequently you hear this line, this request?
I think just by doing the math, you're likely to hear it more in larger companies because there's more people, more opportunities for it. I'm working with a small company, 250 people currently, and I've heard that same thing in a 250 person company. I've heard, this is the way we do things. And for me, that's like waving a red flag in front of a bull. We do this because we've always done it. Okay, perfect chance for an experiment. So I think, again, to the law of numbers, you hear it more, but it's proportionately prevalent. But I think it goes more back to the character of the organization and how willing the organization is to allow people to be something other than correct every time.
Perfect. So we've done a lot of talking about what we see as coaches and how often we experience this this particular response, this particular kind of request, and we've touched on empathy, we've touched on psychological safety. So now I'm going to pose an open question to Amy. I'm going to start with you. If you come across, if someone is listening who finds themselves in a situation where their first response is to say to you, I'm just doing what my boss told me to do. They have their orders and I have mine. How can I, as someone who's getting ready to say that remark to someone in all seriousness, what would you suggest the person do to force themselves to take a step back and maybe reevaluate their own internal thought process mechanism, so people can catch themselves before they actually say it to us? What would you suggest if you were talking to yourself in a mirror?
I would ask that question, what problem are you trying to solve? And then try to have a discussion form around that. One thing that I do remember, this happened a couple of years ago at the company I'm currently at. Somebody, I want to say it was our CIO, he wanted a report. And we were going to have to do all kinds of crazy things in JIRA to get this report. And they came to me and he's like, well, we need this report. So what are we going to do? And the CIO wasn't in the room, but nobody was asking the question. Everyone started solutioning. Well, we could do this. Well, I don't know if that's what he wants. And we could do that. Well, I don't know if that's what he wants. And then I had to go, did anybody ask him what he really wanted? Like, what problem was he trying to solve? And as a team, we were able to discuss that. Chris is smiling. I think she might remember this conversation. We had a discussion then. Oh, well, maybe we should talk with him and try to figure out, does he need this kind of metric? Does he need that kind of metric? Does he need it to be automated? Is it something that he just wants to go in and push a button and look at? Or do we need to present it to him somehow? You know, there were so many questions and nobody had asked them. And when we started asking those questions and getting a discussion going, we finally came up with something that we thought might work. But without asking those crucial questions in that beginning, what problem are we trying to solve? We wouldn't have gotten anywhere. We would have had how many different iterations of a report when he would have said, I didn't want this, I meant that. We could have solved that just by sitting down with him and asking the question. So, you know, to you or anybody who comes up to me and says, my boss says that I need this. Okay, let's talk about this thing that you need instead of just blindly doing it. Right. You know, that gets people thinking.
You know what's interesting? Yeah, what's interesting about your comment, Amy, is something I've experimented with in the sense of what happens when privilege and rank is in the room. Do people change the way they respond, or do people shut down? So something interesting that we've done is run this experiment around, there is no privilege and rank in the room. I'm just going to put the person's name on the chair. So their presence is felt, yet their physical presence isn't there. And it's interesting to see that that still creates influence. So I think you're touching on something interesting just in general of, do we feel that we can even ask what problem are you trying to solve? And do we trust that our leadership or these individuals of privilege and rank can actually articulate what the problem is? Or are they just a cog in the machine delivering a message because their boss told them to? So it's an interesting conversation.
You're very, very much right. And we could spend another episode on that, just the whole idea, the perception that comes with the hippo, right? The hippo in the room. And when the highest paid person comes in and starts talking, everybody kind of backs up and goes, oh shit, well, you know, they outrank me, so I guess I got to listen.
You know what's funny is so what's funny is watching the opposite of that, Jay, where you have, when you have a group of people in, the highest ranking person, everybody's kind of saying something, that the hippo leaves the room and the message changes. The next ranking person leaves, or I've seen this like countless times. The next highest ranking person leaves the room, the message changes. And it's like, eventually you get to like the right level, and then you get to like the real truth kind of a thing. Rather than putting them in the room, right? We get like, it's almost like translation happens, right? With people at high ranking positions are in the room.
And how often is that translation wrong?
I don't think it's necessarily wrong. I think it's just a different message, right? They think it's this problem. Well, then they think it's this problem, and they think it's this problem. It's just seeing the problem differently. The challenge is, going back to Todd's comment about safety, right? Is if they can't say it with them in the room, right? Like, we're never going to get any better.
And Mike put it in the chat, but I am going to call it out, and Chris Wistrom will get a kick out of this. Mike said, get the frame correct. It's all about the frame and getting the frame right. Shout out to our buddy Peter Merrill on the other side of the globe. And Xscale, that was a wild class, and we're recording an episode on that shortly. But he's crazy, but he's right. You need to get the frame correct. What, to Amy's point, what are you trying to solve for? What are we trying to get to? That kernel. It's a lot like conspiracy theory, right? People believe crazy conspiracy theories because at the root of them is a kernel of question. And that kernel of question is logical, and rational, and that let people spiral out of control. And now you have aliens shooting at JFK, from Houston with laser beams. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole right now. I haven't had enough beer yet.
What?
Colonel. There's a colonel in there, and not colonel as in a military colonel. Salute. Colonel is in a popcorn kernel, as in an OS kernel. I'm sorry, Murman. Do I need to spell it for you?
I did not order the code red.
You use words like scope, change. All right, whatever. So I think we're close to time. So I'm going to wrap us up. I'm going to go around the horn real quick. So final thoughts. And the final thought question is going to be this: if you had to pass on one word of advice to someone who's encountering this problem, or one phrase to plant in their ear, so the next time somebody comes across this line of dialogue, what would it be? And I'm going to start with you, Mike Caddell.
What I would say is lead with empathy, and to echo Amy's thought, try to understand a little bit about what's behind it, and there's also a time to quietly disobey and see if you can get away with it.
How about you, Todd?
So I like I'm a fan of the quietly disobey. I think back to my BA days, and sometimes it's a matter of just, which by the way was like April, but one of the things that I'm trying to get to right now is the idea of the 5 whys, just to really understand. It's I'm trying to be good and not the it was wrong. It was the right decision at the right time, back then. But the 5 whys to figure out what teed up, this order in the first place, and from there, how can I work to change it?
Chris Wistrom.
So I think if you are on the end where you are finding yourself saying, I'm just doing what I'm told, don't be afraid to speak truth to power. It can be scary, but find somebody who you can work with. Find a buddy that you can talk through with that. Examine your motivations and challenge yourself to speak truth to power.
Awesome. Andrew Leff.
I would just tell him to rage quit. No.
You could always try that. I mean, not
you said not.
I don't know. In today's economic climes, that would be suggested, but hey.
Yeah. So I'll go with my second thought. I didn't. I misquoted it. I got it wrong, Jay. I know I was supposed to go with my, not my first. I wasn't supposed to verbalize my first thought. I think for me, it would be what is that individual willing to change within their behavior to see if they can warrant a different result. So when you can get past the fatigue, the exhaustion of feeling just, there's nothing I can do to change my situation, so I'm just going to fall in line, that warrants a point or an opportunity to keep trying, or just be okay with not trying anymore. So I think it's almost coming to terms with which direction do you want to go in to make better decisions.
Amy?
I think everyone's pretty much said it. Don't be afraid to ask why. And Chris, hit the nail on the head with find somebody that you're okay with doing that. But really, don't be afraid to ask why. And then come to terms with, are you at that point where it just doesn't matter anymore? And if that's the case, I would encourage that person to find another place to work, quite honestly. I'd be like, it's time for you to go. If you don't think that you can affect change, and if you're extremely unhappy about that, then you need to move on. But if you're okay with this, if this is not the hill you want to die on, okay, then, but don't lose your passion. If there's something else that you can affect change in, go tackle that thing.
Pretty sure Amy just told me I should quit my job. Oof.
So I had 2 senior managers give that same suggestion. Like, things will never change here. You should find something that won't drive you crazy. And lo and behold, I am the driver of that change that has driven me crazy for 3 years.
Yeah, famous last words, right? Things will never change. What's this button do? Yeah, they can't hit it. They couldn't hit an elephant from this distance, right? Like
What if I
there's
eat a
somebody-
bat? What's the worst that could happen?
What are you talking?
You get
are
a career
talking
like Ozzy
Wuhan
Osbourne.
or Ozzy Osbourne? That was my first thought. We're dating ourselves here, Mr. Thrash.
No,
All right,
I'm
Mr.
talking
Murman.
COVID.
I know.
Yeah,
know.
I knew
Murman,
what he was
take
talking
us home.
about, dum-dum.
Take us home, Murman. Final thoughts.
I always like when I talk to parents, like, how would you reason with your children if you couldn't say just because I said, you know? I've used this all the time with clients. I just say, imagine you could give another answer than my boss told me to. What would that answer be? Or what would that thought be? And just by asking them to even, they may not even say it, they may not even do it, but asking them to even consider what would another answer be. Like, what if I didn't let you use that as the reason? What is another reason? Then that's when the conversation gets interesting.
Perfect. We're going to end on that note. So I want to thank our guests, Todd, Mike, Amy, and Chris Wistrom, not Murman. We're not thanking him, for taking time out of their evenings to sit in with us again. On behalf of all of us on the panel, I want to thank all of you listeners for tuning into another episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please give us a review, a rating, a comment on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbros, Xhamster, sorry, not that one, your podcast platform of choice. If you want to join the discussion, our Discord server has been really moving lately. So if you want to hop into the conversation, you like something you heard, you disagree wholeheartedly with what Mike Caddell had to say, hop into Discord, have the conversation. Lastly, we are committed, second to last, we are committed to being free. However, we do have a Patreon. So if you are really enjoying the content, you enjoy the community, and you want to contribute, feel free to sign up. There is no minimum, and you might get a surprise in the mail. And last but not least, this is a shout out that's long overdue. I want to give a shout out to Chris over at Machine Man Records and his artist Krebs, who provided our outro music free of charge to us. So hopefully you like my music taste. It wasn't heavy metal. I went somewhere in a different direction. But thanks again to Chris for throwing some tracks over for us to giving us use. Maybe now we can monetize some of our YouTube channel, because I kept getting us whacked with copyright infringement notices. Who'd have thought the YouTube algorithm would pick up Cannibal Corpse? That being said, on behalf of all the guests here, I want to, it was going to be shorter. Now I'm just going to keep going. I want to thank everybody. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.
Wear a mask.